So let's dive in to our first news story. Now, earlier this month, it was announced that at Roman Vindolanda, a fort not too far from Hadrian's Wall, a remarkable discovery was made for the second time. I am talking, of course, of the writing tablets, Roman writing tablets, which the first discovery, about 30 years ago, is rightly famous, is it not, Andy?
It is, in fact, it was voted the most important British archaeological discovery of all time, and in a poll for the millennium, the turn of the millennium.
Wow.
Um, it's I think it's a story which is about all the best things in archaeology, because it's a story about people, but it's also a story about some really smart research.
Mm-hmm,
And to make this one even better, I think for the first time, Andrew Burley, who's the current director of the excavations at Vindolanda, is claiming that they've even traced the same character in the new tranche of documents that they've just discovered as were found in the original ones that were found in the early 1990s.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And in true to form, as somebody living in North Britain, it's somebody who's in one case demands beer and in another case demands to be allowed to go on holiday.
Yep, yep. No, I very much like it. The character, I think we were just checking, it's Maskless, isn't it? Is the guy's name?
Maskless, that's right. Roman soldier called Maskless.
Yeah, and a character he is indeed. But it's worthwhile just briefly talking about these, I suppose, as archaeological discoveries, because
Yes.
it's worthwhile emphasising their rarity. There's a reason. I mean, they're 2 millimetre thick planks of oak, carefully produced. Two sheets linked by some sort of string or leather that could be folded and sealed as a letter. And on the inside of those two sheets, you would write your note in beautiful cursive script and
Or
tiny
very
little
difficult to
letters.
read cursive
Very
script.
difficult to read. In fact, my lovely wife, as you know, was a classicist in her first life, and every time she looks at them, she's like, "I've got no idea what any of those letters are. Never mind what it says." But their survival is astonishing. They survived by an accident, essentially. This was part of a sort of a document purge gone wrong, really.
Well, yeah, exactly. What appears to have happened is that a cohort of Batavian soldiers who would have been recruited in what's now Holland in the Rhine Delta area um, were moving station. They were moving from Vindolanda to another fort, and as part of the tidying up process and the handover process, they dumped the bits of the regimental archive they didn't want. And the original documents that were found in the early 1990s appear to have been burnt on a bonfire, and for some reason the bonfire went out. The documents weren't completely destroyed, and they ended up being sealed in this anoxic layer,
Mm.
and were able to be recognised by the archaeologists and recovered, and by some very clever conservation, some very clever um, science involving particular kinds of lighting and so on. It's been possible to read these very ephemeral strokes of ink on these very, very thin wooden slivers.
Yeah, and actually, it's interesting because those sort of it's the sort of stuff that we can see and we do see today in, for example, campfires. If you've ever been camping,
Yes.
those of you at home will know that sometimes something will just survive in the ashes at the bottom. That's because actually ash is a good heat insulator. Actually,
Yes.
it can keep you safe from the heat, and so I wouldn't recommend trying it in person, but it can certainly keep objects safe. And so sometimes maybe a piece of cardboard will be untouched at the bottom of a campfire, and the same happened here in the case of these letters. But then they were sealed in waterlogged deposits. There was no
Yep.
oxygen, nothing rotted, and so we have these letters. Now, what would you say is your favourite thing then about the original letters?
Every year I do a project with the local primary school, which is called Treasures,
Mm-hmm.
and it was the brainchild of their history coordinator, who wanted to show these kids who are 7, 8 year olds that treasure doesn't have to be glittery stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Treasure can be, a family photograph. Treasure can be any object that you think's important. And obviously, archaeologists, we go out, we spend a lot of time trying to persuade the public that the treasures we are interested in aren't things that sit at the bottom of the sea in chests.
But
Um,
my favourite discoveries, for example, Viking York, are
mm,
the sock and the poo.
exactly, and exactly, and that's where the Vindolanda letter comes in. That because when I'm lucky being based in London. We can take the kids to the British Museum, the best free show in London. And in the Roman British Gallery, there is a display on the Vindolanda letters. And at the end of the session, I've asked them to find their own favourite object in the gallery, and we discuss that. But then I get them to try and guess what mine is.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, in the 5 years I've been doing it, it's been guessed once by one kid. But it's actually what's called the Lepidina letter, which is a birthday invitation from the commanding officer at Vindolanda's wife to her friend, Lepidina, to come to. And it's a wonderful, warm greeting from two people who clearly know each other well and are very fond of each other. She refers to her as my dear sister and so on. But it's also so it's about a very human thing that anyone can recognise, inviting a friend to a birthday party. But at the same time, it's also about the culture of those women on that remote military station in the north of Britain, as folklore has it that these. All those poor soldiers from Italy freezing to death on Adrian. No,
you got from Italy. You've already said, yes, from Holland. When actually, funnily enough, actually, in that sense, it is remarkable because the place, the time is now of such interest to so many people, but also as well. I mean, these documents have since been usurped as the oldest written documents in Europe by a find in London a couple of years ago.
Indeed, and in fact by a find that actually mentions the name London for the first time. In one case.
Very nice. But nonetheless, that birthday invitation, I do believe, remains the oldest female author or voice that we have in Europe. So the original find is incredible, and this new find is actually around 75 tablets that obviously they're still in the process of handling these. Some of them are very fragmentary, but the very fact that you can trace. I mean, the odds of being able to trace. I mean, I suppose the odds are probably quite good in so much as this was probably all the same event, perhaps the same document burning, but still the ability to track a named individual through time. From 2,000 years ago, it's just
and the fact that again there's such a good story because they have this man Maskless, who in the original documents is asking for a supply of beer to be sent to an outpost, and in the current one that's being reported by the site director Andrew Burley, he's asking for some leave. Now, whether that's to sleep off a hangover or we can speculate, but no, it is this. This day-to-day running of this Roman military station up on the Staingate, the forerunner to Hadrian's Wall, this chain of forts across the top of the province. So we've got that we can see the bureaucracy of the Roman army in action. But at the same time, we also see the personal relationships, like between Claudius Severan and Lepidina, but also the relationship with the local population, and in fact the casual racism you have in one document. We know that in Vietnam the GIs would refer to Vietnamese people as gooks, pejoratively. In Vindolanda, at the turn of the 1st century, it appears they referred to the local Britons as Bratunculi, which means wretched Brits, and there are very disparaging comments about how they fight and their capabilities as soldiers. So we've got there's a huge amount of information in these very simple, very fragile documents. But I think the key thing, like you say, it's about voices, and we hearing that voice across almost 2,000 years is a very special experience, I think.
Yeah. Although I quite, I mean, I like the idea of someone going Britunculi and proud.
Absolutely.
Indeed, you'll never take my farm. Okay. Well, it's So, and I think we're both very much. I'm certainly. I don't want to speak for you, but I think you are very much looking forward to seeing what comes out of this latest discovery.
Oh, very much. I mean, as I said, the Vindolanda letters were voted the most important find of the millennium, first most important find in British archaeology in a vote at the millennium by some people, and I think in this case, they're only more so now.
Exactly, and something which this I think continues really to underline the very special the very special character of the Vindolanda excavations, in so much
Yeah.
as these have been conducted by the same family for generations now. The site is privately run, and essentially the archaeology fuels is self-fueling. It's sort of self-funding in many respects, although obviously funds have to be sourced every now and then for big projects. It's a very special project on Hadrian's Wall, and it's in my case. I mean, you say you're lucky to live near the British Museum, etc. I'm very lucky to live in within an hour's drive of Vindolanda. So we benefit. We all benefit from this sort of discovery, I think.
I think actually, as an aside to that, it shows how important it is to think beyond a sort of a one season or a three season HLF archaeological project. The archaeology at Vindolanda has been going on for nearly half a century now,
Hmm.
and
Well, and
and there's as much work. If the accounts are to be believed, there's as much work to do again.
yeah, yeah,
So
no, absolutely. Well, and also the funny thing is that there's nothing. Um, it's a little bit like the argument that people level cynically, for example, at say climate scientists and this kind of thing, that actually the people involved in certain fields of especially science or other data producing endeavours have an interest in just artificially prolonging their work, in making false claims and blah blah blah. But actually, I think Vindolanda really highlights that in some respects, perhaps the rest of the world does archaeology perhaps a bit too quickly. I mean, there are some similar excavations to be found. For example, there's a Çatalhöyük, this kind of thing in Turkey,
indeed, yeah.
which kind of underscore that. Okay, yeah, sure. Sometimes you're just going to come across one burial in a high street and you get rid of it. But so I think maybe actually there is a with archaeology there's something. I remember once having a conversation with someone about archaeology and anthropology and the difference between the two. And so essentially, we sort of came down on this idea that anthropologists, really, unless they kind of have a hive mind, they're not able to really take their time with their research. They have to, within a lifetime, if they're lucky, they're studying one culture. They have to do the research, do the analysis, come to some decent conclusions, publish the thing, do the lecture tour, whatever, have an opinion, so on and so forth. Whereas
Knock the book out so you get your points in your academic rating and all the rest of it.
exactly, yeah. Whereas archaeology and archaeologists, not that we do actually embrace this, but there is scope for us actually to have a slightly more luxurious approach to archaeology. And I think in the case of Vindolanda, they really have embraced that ability to look at the site, to keep on going and asking questions generation to generation. And
Although I absolutely agree with you on that, but I think it's also fair to point out that perhaps, first of all, our colleagues in academic institutions might say, actually, again, particularly with the current situation regarding funding, regarding tenures, regarding the fact that you have to have so many publications in high impact journals, they don't have that luxury of time.
No.
And I think it's also fair to point out that some people have argued that actually Vindolanda isn't under threat, and therefore some of the archaeology, is actually unnecessary, because it's unnecessarily disturbing a very sensitive and very important site. So you can look at this both ways. Personally, I think whatever the issues are around that, the benefits actually at the moment far outweigh the negatives. And without that archaeology, we wouldn't have this fabulous archive of material from Britain, which is unique and has just given us so much insight over the last 50 years and promises more.
Definitely, and I think in that respect, I think I was sort of I was it's a dream. It's a blue sky thinking. If archaeology could just sort of take its time, but no, as you say, yes, in the real world, things aren't that simple.